Welcome very, very much to Conversations. A pleasure to welcome the program. A program I've been wanting to do for a long time by Jack Bredin. He's a
John Bredin.
John Bredin.
Bredin. The E sounds like an A.
Bredin.
Okay.
And he's had a program that's been on Manhattan Network for a very long time, and it's called the
Public Voice Salon.
Public Voice Salon, which is a very piece, and he's also building a certain sense of modern-day Renaissance man. It's very true. He has a wide-ranging systems understanding of things that is very interesting, a very interesting person. I've been wanting to do a program. We were able to work it out. And so, I'm really happy to welcome you to the program, John.
Well, it's...
Sorry I used Jack. Sometimes it's like...
well, my dad's name is Jack, so it's...
Oh, okay.
It's,
Jack
right.
Jr.
That's okay, right.
Bredin by any name. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. Now, share with us a little bit. Your program is really good. You've talked with a lot of interesting people on interesting subjects. You have a great sense of social concern and conscience and so forth. But share your own background. Born and raised, a little education.
Okay.
And then let's talk about the human condition and also about your particular your work activity, and also you've taken an interest in business and so forth too. But born and raised, a little bit of your background.
Born and raised in Edgewater, New Jersey, small town on the Hudson River. Strong sense of community there. Dad was an actor when he was a young man.
Really?
He was in a play with Warren Beatty.
Wow.
A rare pre-Hollywood Warren Beatty.
Yeah.
And my dad actually had a chance to be an actor on the road. Chester Morris, who was a director of a play called K Mutiny Court Martial, wanted my dad to go on the road, but he had just gotten married. And
your dad had written it?
No. My dad was an actor.
Oh, he was the actor,
in the K Mutiny Court Martial.
Yeah.
And so this was in his early life. But he got married, and he put that aside, and he did other things.
K Mutiny. Was that the subtitle of the film? Was it Humphrey Bogart?
Yes, it was an excerpt. It was just the court martial scene, and that was a play on Broadway with Henry Fonda, but it was off Broadway. My dad. It was directed by Chester Morris.
Okay,
at the North Jersey Playhouse.
So you had that as a background. You had an intellectual for a father. Yeah.
Theatrical.
That's
and
part of the intellectual community. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, my dad is a great intellectual. He's in his early 70s now.
Yeah.
But my dad's mother, my paternal grandmother, was brought to America by a famous actress.
Who was that?
By Blanche Walsh, who was a top star on Broadway at the turn of the century. She did very serious parts. She played in Trilby, which was the precursor to Phantom of the Opera.
Okay.
And she played, her most notable role was in a Tolstoy adaptation of Tolstoy's last book, which is called Resurrection, which is his most important novel, his most political novel, rather, his most provocative, and his best-selling novel, which very few people have remembered. They remember War and Peace and Anna Karenina, but Resurrection, my grandmother's benefactor, the woman who brought my grandmother to America from London when she was 7 years old, and basically adopted her and was like a second mother, was a great star on Broadway.
Yeah, you have theatrical roots, and that's part of the intellectual community. Yeah, absolutely. What about on the other side?
Well, my grandfather on my mother's side was half Italian, half German.
Okay.
And he grew up in Harlem, and he was very inventive. He had 3 patents.
Wow.
He worked for the New York City Hospitals Corporation. He was very good, with his hands. He could build anything, fix anything. He built his own house in Fort Lee, New Jersey, where my 92-year-old grandmother still lives.
Wow.
Shout out to my grandmother.
Yeah, absolutely. Bless her.
And basically, my grandfather, when he was working at Harlem Hospital and also worked at Sydenham, found out that patients were dying because of faulty wiring. Faulty wiring in a hospital. Now, this is something that Ralph Nader has documented, Gary Null also, that hospitals wound up killing a lot of patients.
I think there's a lot of germs floating around, for one thing.
That also, but my grandfather was an electrician, so he knew the electrical wiring. And he saw that patients were dying because of faulty wiring, and the hospitals would put down heart attack. See? So what he did was he created an invention, which he called the redundant grounding system, so that completely prevented any accidental electrocutions at the hospital.
Wow.
And it also
Which had been occurring.
which had been occurring.
It might have been booked as heart attacks.
He wired the whole hospital up. After that, they never had a problem.
Wow.
With my grandfather's invention.
That's a major design initiative.
It's a design initiative.
Yeah.
What he did then, he went around the country. When he retired at the age of 57 in the 1970s, he tried to get the U.S. government to mandate this.
Yeah.
Because this would also prevent accidental electrocutions at the work sites, not just in hospitals,
Yeah,
but
it's
in
a
work
major
sites and in homes. And also, it would prevent fires that start behind the walls of homes and then flash over.
Why wouldn't that have been just picked up by the marketplace and everybody realize it and run with it?
Before he passed away, my grandfather, he was in his 80s. He was very into technology. Laptops had just come out.
Yeah, it sounds like Edison or something.
He was that kind of a guy.
Yeah,
He grew up with this as a grandfather.
Yeah.
He also had a patent on a time variable thermostat, which was a disc like this that it rotated and it adjusted the temperature in the house when you weren't there. So it could go down,
Well,
you know.
sure, I can remember having a thermostat. You turn it up to, right.
You manually do it, but
it would calibrate the furnace, bringing the heat.
now in the late 70s, when
or
you had
the air conditioning now,
when you had the oil crisis and people were looking for ways to save energy, my grandfather came up with this idea of a time variable that would be automatic, and it was a mechanically based system.
Right, okay.
He got a patent on that, which was in the New York Times.
Wow.
So he was featured in 1979. My grandfather was in the New York Times.
That makes sense. You could have it go down at night when everybody's sleeping.
When everybody's asleep,
right,
it would kick up in the early morning at 5 a.m. before you got up, and this and that. Now,
that makes me think of Buckminster Fuller. I'm not sure if you're that familiar, but he used to have a thing, anticipatory design science. And he said, rather than trying to exercise people to be good, invent things that can make an environmental condition where the good or the advanced can emerge, you know.
Wow.
So that's very important, Those kind of people are very important. Yeah.
That's a wonderful comparison. Thank you.
Yeah, rather than being political necessarily, you know.
Yes.
Anyway, that's a different take on human activity. Yeah.
But it's tied in politically because here's what happened. My grandfather got the invention on the electrical grounding system.
Yeah, right.
He went around the country from when he was in his late 50s and up until he passed away in '86.
Right.
A 30-year odyssey to get our government to mandate this that would have made the workplace safer.
Is that now generally in use?
It's not in use. They completely ignored him. He would get up in front of 1,000 people. He would lecture. He would show how his device would save lives.
Yeah.
And this was happening at
irrefutably.
Irrefutably, yes.
It wasn't a refutation of the general premise. Right?
He's got the patent on it, and he proves how it works. But this was at a time when the regulatory agencies now were being controlled by the corporations, and so they were giving him a hard time.
Well, they would have always had a say, but still, go ahead. Yeah,
and this was at a time again where, and one of my grandfather's early heroes was Ralph Nader.
Oh,
because
really?
He was a workplace safety person. You know, my grandfather
unsafe at any speed.
Unsafe at any speed. But even Ralph Nader, it turns out, was being at that time in the '80s when Reagan came in. He was being pushed out. Nader used to get frequent access to members of Congress, but as the political dynamic shifted to the right, he got pushed out, and then my grandfather couldn't get a hearing on his invention. You know.
But it was, well, okay. I wonder how many good ideas go aborting or something, or
yes.
So. Was it on the basis of the facts were wrong, as Joe Friday might have said, on his premise, or was it a matter of economic interest?
I think it was partially economics because
usually you can find an economic interest behind a bad policy.
Yes, but all this ties into my biography because I grew up having an activist grandfather.
Yeah,
seeing a guy who was basically had a mission in life.
You're right.
To go around, and he was in his 70s and his 80s. Driving around the country, making speeches around, coming back to the house, talking about it at family parties, going down the basement, perfecting the invention. I grew up with this.
Now that was your who?
That was my mother's father.
Mother's father.
My mother's father. Now my father.
I got a little confused. Yes. You're talking about Nader, kind of contemporary, but Now
my father, who was an actor, who was in a play with Beatty, like I said. when he became an activist in his 30s, and became an activist in the town of Edgewater, standing up to the developers who were coming into town and bribing the local politicians so that they would approve of their projects that were out of sync with the character of the town. And because of my father's activism, one of the mayors actually went to jail. And was put in jail by a young Chris Christie, who was just starting his career there. So there was a little thing, but my dad became an activist, and he started going to council meetings when they were going to build behind our house. We had a beautiful woods behind our house. It was kind of like the Palisades. You know the Palisades? You know, over in Englewood, sort of goes down into Edgewater. You got these beautiful woods behind our house. They were going to, you know, condos were going to go behind our house. My father got wind of this. He went down to the local council meeting with a group of citizens, and because of his acting background, he was able to stand out and become a star on the local stage of the council on that. And was active. He's still very active. My parents live in Ocean Grove, and once in a while he goes to meetings there.
So that's encouraging of a lot of what we call interdirectedness. That is, you're setting your own pattern. You're motivated. You have a good sense of purpose and drive and everything. And that's something that I think is characteristic of you. It would seem to me, and it might have something to do with your background and your parentage.
Well, we come from someplace. We all do.
Right.
And so with me, I started writing as a young boy, and writing stories, and I won the English award in 8th grade. That was the first award I ever won. So for me, the idea of communicating was always very important to me.
You sure carried through on that.
Telling stories. I became an English major at Fordham University. And after high school, you know, for a time, you know, went to a community college, wound up at Fordham, but dropped out at one point and was working in business. I worked in sales for a while. Got back in college, finished my degree. Went on to NYU.
And you did it in literature?
In literature, mostly focusing on literature, because I didn't want to get a degree in something that was just practical. I wanted something that, you know, was deeper, that was intellectual. I wasn't going to be a business major or something like that.
That's interesting, because I'm older and everything, but it was back in the era of Woodstock and all of that. Nobody seemed to be interested in business, and now it seems everybody's interested in business. It seems to be that's become a major thing of, you know, the money quest or whatever, you know, but it's just interesting.
Well, I think it's a big mistake, and I think we need to move away from the business major and maybe take some courses in business, but to overwhelmingly study business, I think is a very narrow thing to do. And I think that's one reason we're in the mess that we're in our society. I wonder
if that was, like, if I may, just like about 1970, is to me, like in DNA, they have markers. I had my DNA done, and you have a thing in it, you can get a marker on it's really interesting. It's new science. It's marching on. It's getting, I mean, the advance of knowledge is just going exponentially now and everything, and they can get a marker. And with men, it's the Y chromosome. I may have told you this on the phone, but they did it. They took a swab from my cheek, and they go, and then they came back, and it is a scientific looking at your background, and it's got a scientific basis that seems to be acceptable and everything. And it was relating me to an individual who existed, 60,000 years ago.
Oh my!
The individual was located in Africa, in Ethiopia. And then there's other markers that, you know, it traces up to the present. So those are markers in evolutionary terms. They're markers in history. Or if you could take that as a metaphor, there's markers in history. And I have a feeling for that period around 1970. There was something blowing in the wind, something existential, something out of the larger gestalt of everything that's going on that are markers. I think that's a way to think about history in a way. And then how do you deal with the emergence of the new in terms of evolutionarily? I don't want to get all off on this, but it's just that, let me just finish it. Like Homo sapien, we appeared 200,000 years ago, according to the understanding that we have now. We didn't have it 100 years ago, we do now. So there's understanding and knowledge growing all the time. And before that, we didn't exist as a species, we were contained in, well, the predecessor species to Homo sapien, of which we are all one species. In Africa, we're all Africans. 200,000 years ago, it was Homo habilis. We were contained in Homo habilis. And then we were destined to go into become what is called Homo sapien, our species. And I'm wondering if we're coming to the end, or what the relationship is of this evolutionary process with the Homo sapien at the leading edge of understanding the evolution of consciousness and so forth, whether we're coming to the end of the Homo sapien era, or we're coming into a new relationship collectively in the universe, or not. I have a feeling we are, and that a marker period might be around 1970. I don't know if any of that makes any sense or resonates with you or not.
It really does, because I think
It
that
does.
for me...
It's rare, because most people never think except historically. You know, you get thinking evolutionarily, the human adventure.
I think history is very important, Harold, and I'm very upset as an educator that they're taking away history.
You think
and
so? Yeah.
I know so.
Okay,
I
yeah,
know
right.
so.
Okay.
They're pushing a marketing business model on young people today,
Right,
even at the
right.
college level. I teach at a community college.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And young people are being considered human products for the marketplace.
Yeah.
And the college president is like a CEO now.
Yeah.
And they're pushing marketability instead of enrichment and cultural growth and critical thinking.
Right.
And so we have to fight back, and we have to, and your show is a wonderful resource. And by the way, I did some research and saw some of the amazing guests, you know, who you've had on, Buckminster Fuller, Gary Hart. Even it was interesting, Mitt Romney's father, George Romney, at a time when Republicans were not as crazy wacko to the right as they are now, when we could have a moderate liberal Republican like a George Romney.
Yeah.
But I do think that
I just watched Amy today, and we got a new Bradley Manning now, and they were talking about that, and they went back to the Frank Church. I did a program with Frank Church. It was only program 205, so that was way back when the church hearings were going on, investigating the intelligence agencies and everything like that. That relates to the news today. Yeah, a lot of people, we've done about 3,000 hour-long interviews or programs, or conversations.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And the dialogic format, which is a format that I am very comfortable with as an English teacher who's dialogic. My classrooms are very conversation-based, and it was actually from being an English teacher that gave me the inspiration to have a TV show.
Okay, really?
And to bring the dialogic aspect out into the community to help people find their voices. That's why the name of our show, which I co-produce with my wife Claudia, is called the Public Voice Salon.
Yeah, it's a really good. You're talking with Judith Molina and these other. And you just had Darryl. Who was the fellow you just had? The
Thomas Bender.
Thomas Bender,
American historian.
Yeah, and you've had a wide variety of intellectually interesting people talking in depth and conversationally about the human condition, and I sort of, I'm really, I've been watching it over the decades. I'm really glad we got together and were able to get together to talk about it.
Thank you.
You've done it into television now. When did you get the idea of doing television? You were teaching then at literature or what?
I started teaching as a substitute teacher in the late 90s, in the mid to late 90s, in Hoboken, New Jersey, which is where I live. I was on a master's program.
Good town.
Wonderful town. I love it. Great sense of community.
Yeah,
you walk down the street, you say hello to people. You know, it has a very nice connected sense.
Community.
Sense of community.
Yeah.
Like Robert Putnam, who's one of my heroes, who wrote this book Bowling Alone.
Yes, right.
Where he says that the number of people you can say hello to indicates the mental health of a community. You know, and Hoboken has that.
Yeah.
And New York is kind of losing that, I think. Certain neighborhoods have it, but you know. Anyway, the thing is, but you're creating community with this television show, which is a wonderful thing. And then, you know, basically, I went to a program at NYU which was very cutting edge, very forward thinking at the time in the mid '90s, and most of my professors were from the '60s era. So they were radicals. I had a teacher who was a professor, who had Noam Chomsky as a professor.
Wow.
They were reinventing how English is taught, right? So I'm part of that project. I learned about Stanley Aronowitz and the school he founded up in Harlem, which is where I taught. It was the first high school I taught at.
Oh, really?
So getting a lot of progressive...
I didn't know that. He started a high school?
He started a high school, Stanley Aronowitz, called Park East.
Boy, he's been busy.
He's done it all.
Yeah,
He's one of my heroes.
Great guy.
He's a fabulous guy. I saw him on your show, too.
Yeah, we've done a few programs with him over the decades,
So, and all this stuff, and bringing these ideas out, I grow through this. I love to be in dialogue with people. And then, you know, as a college professor, I've taught in a variety of different colleges, Montclair State, Rutgers, CUNY, always under the radar. I say under the radar. I wrote a book called Teaching Under the Radar.
Really?
Confessions of a Secret Agent of Change. Because if you want
stealth,
you gotta, if you're going to teach well, you got to start trouble.
Okay,
but you got to watch what you say in the teacher's room.
You got that trademark, that term? You're going to teach well, you got to be, what was it?
You got to be a rebel. You got to start trouble.
You got to start trouble,
because the system is moribund.
Not be afraid of that.
Exactly, exactly. You have to shake it up and stir the pot.
Encourage critical thinking.
Exactly.
And also systems thinking. They're sort of linked, I think, don't you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And it's galloping, it seems to me, John, into specialization. They're breaking everything down into specialization, partly because of the computer. If linear regression allows specialization, there used to be some comprehensive systems thinking in the 19th, 20th century. There were some places for that. But it's now, and the people who run the world, at least Fuller would see, and say that they will divide and conquer the intellectual community by dividing it up into specializations. So everybody becomes a specialist.
Yes.
And they become so specialized. There's no place or no thinking of comprehensive, like big systems, patterns, or pattern recognition that maybe the system calls for. They're all tunnel visioned off, and it's very hard to get effective understanding. Like in a pointillist painting, rather than looking at a dot, you're looking at the whole painting. And there's not much of that kind of thinking going on, or place for that at the university anymore, it seems to me. I don't know, I may be wrong.
No, Harold, you're very right. And when I was started my college career at Bergen Community College, I was a liberal arts major.
Okay.
And I felt embarrassed about telling
Being
people I was a liberal arts major until I realized that liberal arts is the most important thing anybody could study.
Thank you. I think that way,
And now my students now, my college students, I see they're embarrassed when some of them who are going in the liberal arts, and they kind of like, if it's not practical, if it's not accounting.
There's all this,
And I disabuse them of that notion right away. And
Do
I
you?
encourage them to study real stuff, to study, history and philosophy and psychology and literature, and then you could always study business later on, which I believe it's true that at Harvard and Yale and the Ivy League schools you can't study business for an undergraduate degree.
Oh, really?
See, that's the wealthy elites want their children to be well-rounded, and then go on and get a master's in business, but it's the young kids, the middle class and the poor, the working class, who go to colleges. They're being trained like robots to just sort of administer and be clerks and not be human beings. And look at the mess it's got us in as a society. Look at the financial crises, look at the ecological crises. We are in a big problem here, Harold, and I'm trying to do what I can on all fronts, you see, as a teacher, trying to wake people up and liberate people in the classroom, and also now outside the classroom in the business space, trying to be a force of change and reform. I recently got a real estate license, so I'm working in business, and I realize now that the business culture has been shifted all the way over to the right.
I would say so, since Reagan.
Since Reagan and before Reagan, I'll tell you. The first think tank that was started on the right in the corporate culture was called the American Liberty League. Liberty League.
When did that go back?
In 1934.
34.
It was founded by the DuPonts. Actually, three DuPont brothers: Rene, Lamont, and Irene. And they wanted to go against FDR, so they created this propaganda group. that claimed to be nonpartisan, and the New York Times called it the Saran Wrap League because they said you could see right through it. It's like Saran Wrap. It's like DuPont's products. You know? But they basically mobilized against the New Deal, against FDR, and that set the stage for a series of right-wing organizations like the Mount Pelerin Society.
I don't know.
Yes, and that was Friedrich von Hayek.
Oh, Van Hayek.
He was the right-wing intellectual who influenced then Ronald Reagan. And they all read these books. You know, General Electric had a guy named Lemuel Boulware, who was the vice president of public relations. And when Reagan gave up the acting in the 50s, and he didn't want to retire, he wanted to keep working, he got a job at General Electric as a publicity guy. And he would give talks at GE plants around the country. He was only supposed to talk about washing machines and dryers, but he worked politics into his shtick. And the reason being, he was being mentored by this guy, Lemuel Boulware, who was a radical right-wing conservative, who hated unions, who thought that regulations were bad, who was a free market fundamentalist, and he got a hold of Reagan and he pumped him up with these ideas. He gave him books to read. He gave him pamphlets and things to read. And
Reagan was String Actors Guild. He was
a Democrat.
He was a Democrat and progressive at an early stage. Then he got turned or something like that.
He was a New Deal Democrat. He was a New Deal. He gave a speech for Harry Truman in 1948, as late as 1948. Okay? Now, where I learned all this stuff is from an amazing book by Kim Phillips Fine called Invisible Hands, The Businessmen's Crusade Against the New Deal.
Very important,
Very important to know the analysis of how they did it.
It still lives. I mean, there still is a crusade against the New Deal by a lot of what we call the right wing, I think, don't you?
Sure. I mean, it lives on in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in the Business Roundtable. And my argument is
the establishment in general has a huge, they have a huge say with the business and political establishment of the world, still, particularly now. Maybe changing, but anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to get off.
If you are in business today, okay, the oxygen you breathe is free market fundamentalism. And that was not always the case.
That'd be Schumpeter was arguing for that in opposition to Keynes. Keynes had set up a lot of the institutions, you know, in the 30s and after the Second War. But Schumpeter was part of the Austrian school, and he was for creative entrepreneurialism, and he was a major economic force in the establishment of the canon that Robert Heilbronner has written so well about, you know. But anyway, that's and they're in the ascendancy, and they got the claim of practicality.
Oh my
gosh!
Be
practical.
Well, if we're going to be practical today, we have to save our planet. Because
we are that way to me, doesn't
it? Deep trouble. I just came from the Left Forum this past weekend.
I was there. I met you there.
And Jill Stein, who was the Green Party candidate for president, she gave a wonderful speech.
She's
about
very articulate.
Climate crisis is out of control. And now we're at 400 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, which they say is just unconscionable. And if it continues at this rate, where we don't have time left. We might not have a planet by the end of the century.
So at the end of the
end, and if you look at the nuclear threat, if you look at the fact that you have biological and chemical and all this stuff going around, we need a consciousness shift. We need to move toward peace, toward love, toward caring. And that's going to happen in the business world and outside the business world. And I think a big problem is this quest for profits at all, just kind of mindless search for profits and forgetting about the community, forgetting about people. I think we need a new bottom line in our society. And I belong to an organization also called the NSP, Network of Spiritual Progressives. NSP, Network of Spiritual Progressives, started by Michael Lerner and Cornel West.
Michael Lerner. And who?
Cornel West.
Okay, Cornel's really strong now, And how's Rabbi Lerner?
He's doing wonderful.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. He was up on West End Avenue.
Yes. He's doing well. I belong to this organization, this NSP, trying to bring a spiritual critique of American culture and create a new bottom line. New bottom line. So in other words, it's not only valuing money and power, but also love, kindness, caring, ecological sensitivity, generosity, and there's a bill that's been put before Congress by Dennis Kucinich called the ESRA, the ESRA, which is the Environmental and Social Responsibility Amendment, which says that any corporation, a big corporation that makes over $100 million a year, not small mom and pops, big corporations, have to have their charter renewed every 5 years.
Have to have it renewed.
Their charter.
Who renews their charter? Do you know? I mean, who does it?
There is right now. You don't have your charter renewed. Right now, you get a charter for life. But this is a new proposal.
Is that the way it works?
This is a proposal that you would have to, your charter would have to be renewed based on your effectiveness in ecological and how you affect the community, how you treat your workers, how you whether you pollute or not. And there would be a jury of citizens. Citizen jury, right? To look at that corporation and say, okay.
Now, is this in place, or has this been proposed, or what is
Kucinich put it before the Congress. Kucinich put it before. But the NSP, the Network of Spiritual Progressives, they came up with the idea of this. And Kucinich took the ball and ran with it, and he put it into the Congress.
Well, that could be factoring. That could be factoring some of the externalities that they don't want to deal with, like Hazel Henderson's drawn up and everything. And one thing you're right that the climate change thing is growing. Those tornadoes are just something else. They're coming into new force and everything. But also I was encouraged, if you can call back 10, 12 years, a thing that really was a concern was the ozone. The ozone, the hole in the ozone layer opening up over Antarctica and so forth. And I'm very encouraged that they did manage to pass the, unlike they're having such difficult with the with the CO2 now, they passed a resolution, the Montreal Protocol. The world, political and economic leadership passed it, and they've successfully averted by fluorocarbons or something. They got rid of because that was contributing to that. It was science, and they took heed, and they've been able to apparently deal with that question that was so dangerously on the agenda. 10, 15 years ago, and they seem to have been able to address that. You think they might at some point be able to address these larger issues that, the climate change issues, even though you're up against the fossil fuel industry and a lot of vested interests. But you understand, do you remember the ozone thing?
Sure.
Yeah, and they dealt with it. The intellectual, political, business leadership of the world dealt with that. Or seem to have.
We've had crises that we've surmounted. I mean, World War II was a great crisis.
Sure was.
To defeat the Nazis and the Japanese. Now we have fascism creeping into our society. And our democracy is being threatened. I think people will rise up and to the challenge. But I think it's a problem of education. I think people just don't know stuff. And now, if you look at the rise of the business major over the past 30 years, these are folks who don't know history because they haven't been taught history. They need to be taught. We need to create education spaces in the community. Shows like yours are very important, I think. But some sort of dialogical spaces for people to come in.
Shows like yours.
Thank you very much.
You've had the wit or the inspiration to get into and move toward multimedia as one way of getting educational material or educational consideration into the general society. I think that's the way it's going to go, increasingly.
I also have a cultural dialogue circle I started that meets in cafes and people's homes.
Wonderful.
I started this actually at a used bookstore in Hoboken 10 years ago.
Good for
And it
you.
was once a week, anybody could come. We put up flyers in the community. I wrote letters to the editor, and that thing just blossomed into this incredible happening where
it's continuing.
It went on for 7 years. I facilitated it for a year and a half. I co-created it with Carmen and Cornell Russo, who were the owners of this wonderful bookstore, community bookstore, used bookstore in Hoboken. And they would supply the food, and I would show up and I would facilitate.
On a regular monthly basis?
It was a weekly basis.
Weekly? That's a heavy-duty agenda,
We did it every Wednesday night.
Okay, good.
And we were only supposed to talk from like about 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock, and many times, people would be there
2:30 in the morning, still going strong.
Exactly,
Yes, right.
because this is such a need. People are hungry for this,
I think you're right.
And I do this in my classrooms, Harold, and I see how my students come alive. At the end of the semester, they want to know, where are you teaching again? I want to think, because this is not offered out there. We've become so competitive, and now, hyper competitive. and this idea of community, of caring, of a Rogerian space. I'm influenced by Carl Rogers a lot.
Yeah, he's great.
You know, and
Rollo May was another. You know,
and Rollo May.
Yeah.
I
hung out with Rollo May.
You hung out with Rollo May?
Yeah, we were in Jerusalem together.
Oh my goodness.
He had that wife from Sweden. He was really funny.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but anyway, never mind.
But no, I'm glad you told me, because I mentioned Rollo May in my book, The Ethical Sales Agent.
Is it Rollo?
Rollo. It is Rollo.
It is Rollo. I got it wrong. Rollo, I had, yeah.
Before I became a teacher, at the age of 30, I undertook a private study on love, where I read books by Leo Buscaglia and Rollo May and Eric Fromm, The Art of Loving.
Fromm is my hero, yes.
You know, and I wanted to understand more about the concept.
Sane society.
Sane society. And, you know, Leo Buscaglia had a course called Love 101 at the University of Southern California, where there were no grades and no tests, and it was a rap session on love. People just sat on the floor.
Would that be bad? That sounds to me like the 60s, 70s, yeah? That's when I was a professor. When I was a professor, I used to give everybody an A on the first day. I just wanted to get rid of the authority.
Oh my goodness.
So I would just say to them, okay, I'll be here every day, I'll come every day. If you want to come, we'll do something. But I wanted to get, and George Stoney is the fellow who was the father of public access. He was a wonderful filmmaker. He died just recently at 96. But he had been a professor of film at at New York University for a long time, and he's the one who got public access on the track of being able to get a franchising agreement and getting it established as an institution across the country for multimedia. So that's what we are now. But he said he was very worried. I did a program just a couple of years before he passed, and he said he was getting very worried. The students would come in, and all they would be saying is they wanted to get that grade. They would say, what do I have to do to be an A? I've got to get into Harvard Business School to make a lot of money. And there was all outer directed impetus rather than being interested in the subject matter themselves. And I think that's something that may be spelling the fact that we're coming up against an economic transformation that's very threatening to the institutional structures of our political and economic system that are out of sync with what the future requires, a time of qualitative change. And they don't have a system of education or of economic theory worthy of the future, that's future-oriented, that has great promise, and that it's a time, like we're back talking about markers, that it's like a marker not just of a little change or a historical change of, you know, one bill being passed or something, or one political party, but a major change that's going on. And the universities, they seem to be just all teaching and breaking everything down into specialization, because that's the way. If you're specialized, you make more money, and you get the peer reviews, and they get the, you know, the thing is being specialized rather than being. And who cares about somebody who's a jack of all trades, interested in everything? I think there should be the department at the university of everything.
I love
everything, because everything is one system, and they should have it. And you know where I think they're going to get a lot, and it's going to be multimedia has a great educational potential that goes a wasting in terms of the Nielsen-rated kind of notions of television or multimedia presentations. I think the universities could become major centers for the production of intellectually relevant multimedia, well-graphic, well-scripted kind of thing. And one last little thing, I did a program with that giant, Mark Buckminster Fuller. He said at the end of the program, he thought that all universities that are going to survive are going to be sent, they're going to have an overarching system within the administration of the educational process of production of, he called them documentaries and multimedia to bring the knowledge of the world to the people of the world. And I still think that that's something that they're bound, that's going to happen. And they're all tied up in having a guy standing in front of the room, an authority figure, that you're used to, you're equating yourself to that, and then, and I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that the universities could become centers of media production. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but I think they could that's going to become a major a major transformative way of having educational content. And one last thing, they have a History Channel now on cable, and the History Channel has really good programming. They have one program, The History of the World in 2 hours. They put together, and it was like, it went for 2 hours, they had ads and stuff, but they went for 2 hours, and it was really good graphics, well scripted, well written, well acted, had markers going through for markers of the validity of the pattern and recognizing a pattern again. And they went through, and they have a friend of mine's using the nuance of the color spectrum as a potential template for being able to get technology where you'll be able to translate the languages of the world autonomically. That is, you would have a device, you could speak, and it would come out in the languages of the world.
Oh my goodness!
If we get and break that language barrier like that, then that program they did had practically no print at all in it. It was all just images, and if somebody, and the one thing you don't have to teach anybody is to talk.
Right.
Everybody knows how to talk. So you get people that can talk. You could put a kid down in front of that, and they could get educated at the highest order without ever having to read a book or listen to anybody specializing on one particular subject in great depth. But they should have an overarching way of presenting information using the technology. I don't know, I went off on a little rant, but I have a major brief against the university educational system. It's just teaching people the ego trip of some professor who's managed to get a position of authority within the system, and then they break it all down in specialization. They divide and conquer the intellectual community.
Yes.
I think there's a revolt against that, but that's a long-term rant that I have.
I think it's important to get it out there, Harold.
Well, I had a little release there.
Good. Open the valve a little bit, let it come out.
Yeah.
But I think, Harold, that the deeper systemic changes that are required here to transform our education system, because it's very badly broken, in our society, are going to require political action. I ran for president last year.
Yeah, you did. How that was a heck of an experience.
I declared my candidacy for president of the United States because I just was sick of watching Obama and Romney and the same old, and I knew it was all, twiddly-dee, twiddly-dum, that kind of thing. So I basically wrote up a flyer and walked around the streets of New York and Hoboken, handed out flyers on the streets. Hi, my name is John Bredin. I'm running for president. And
did you have a party behind you?
No, I was just running a
freelancer.
Just myself.
Freelance president.
It was a way for me to stay sane during all this crazy process.
It was self-therapy.
It was self-therapy.
Yeah, but you were also doing some good. Yeah.
I think I was helping other people stay sane too, because a lot of people, obviously some just dismiss, and some are so numbed out by what's happening. They're so submerged that they can't even identify anything that's
leave me alone. I got
real or anything happening. But there were quite a few people who were stopped and just like, what is this? And they wanted to read what I had to say. We had a lot of great conversations.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah.
It was really very, very. It was a transformative experience for me. To show that a citizen could have a sense of agency.
Did you have a list of particulars or a list of issues?
Oh, sure. I was going to say, green economy.
Yeah. That's getting bigger now, don't you think? That's becoming real.
Sure. But the most controversial campaign promise that I had, the one that got the most interest also, was a 25-hour work week.
25 hours.
25 hours. Because I think now, and it's true, that America is the most overworked country in the world.
Isn't that amazing?
People are exhausted. People don't have time to be with their families, to be with community, to read, to do any kind of intellectual work. We're all on this treadmill between work and home, and we got the iPods in, and we go home, we watch media that's corporate controlled.
Well, I think they could have better fare. They could have educate. I talked to a friend of mine yesterday. I ran a program today. This day, I don't know if you had a chance to see it. Was Greg Carnicero. He's got a thing going with television and everything. But I said I told him I was sitting with my dog. I got my dog. I don't know if you've met me. You got to come over and
Oh,
meet
I have
the
to
dog.
come, yes.
Anyway, I was sitting there with my dog, and I was looking at it, and I looked at the cable, and they had 1,996 channels.
Oh my God.
1,996 channels. Bruce Springsteen once made a song, 57 channels and nothing on.
Right,
But
right.
I was going through looking for something like Nova or something meaningful or something, and it was all dancing bears and nonsense and everything, and there was practically nothing there. But they do have, every once in a while, the medium has just been taken over by the Nielsen chasers, trying to get another business model that can do it. But the educational potential of that medium, and then the medium extended, because it's going exponential now, is they're going and being able to do it multimedia. I mean, they could have really well written, well scripted, like Hollywood feature films and that kind of thing, that are of educational content that could be of interest to the general citizen. I think the general citizen is very able to recognize patterns between a lot of different things, so I'm a fan of multimedia and of television. I'm glad you're in television, if you understand what I mean, but really well done. And there's streams of income that are in the educational place, and institutional connections for financing these kind of things that would be done in the name of education, rather than it only being Hollywood producers looking for another Nielsen winner. Those kind of skills could be taught, and then what they could be used is the professorship as content providers. We were trying, they did that in the Open University in Britain. Are you familiar with that?
I heard
Lord
of it,
Walter
yeah.
Perry. They used a lot of, they had a lot of people, they were all very class-based, you know, Cambridge and all that. And they didn't have very many people in university. They had a thing called the Open University to get some education out like that. And they were using television as a partial part. But the intellectual community is unfavorably inclined toward television because it's used for entertainment. It's thought of just entertainment fluff.
They dismiss it.
Yeah, no, but it has been given over to that. But they use television as a content, and you can get the best minds, you know, and everything. And we tried to bring it here, use some public television stations, try to get Owen Mills and that to try and get interested. And the people who objected to distributing this programming with some of the intellectual leadership of the world to the colleges, in terms of, or to the people, the colleges, it were the college professors. The college professors didn't want to have their authority undercut. You could have the best mind in some field available to you. B.F. Skinner, if you're a behavioralist, you could get it from the horse's mouth, rather than the guy talking about the horse's mouth didn't want to have the horse's mouth brought to the people because it would undercut their authority. You understand? So, I mean, I think the educational institutions are really bound for a major transformation and challenge as places that could be producing multimedia fare that would be, you know, and you could put down, they had this one thing in the History Channel, History of the World in 2 hours. It's got everything going from the development of the universe, elements and everything like that. And a person could look at that, a person of any, and if you got the translation of the language, they could get educated to the highest understanding of science without any, I mean, a kid could look at that. And they could be educated to that and be really, really interesting and grabbing and critical thinking. Multisensorial. I'm off again on my rant. I'm sorry.
No, Harold. I enjoy talking to you, and I see this conversation as a beginning. I want to continue to talk off the air and on the air.
Yeah, we got to become friends.
I think we're building on something. We're building on
sorry
something
I got
here.
off on rants.
No, it's okay. You're saying things that need to be said. Obviously, we need to transform this society and this culture.
In a major way.
We need to get away from warfare. We need to.
Absolutely.
You know, there were actually efforts being made after World War I to outlaw war, and people like John Dewey were involved with that. Who founded the New School. There were all these hopes for peace. Now, Chomsky, when he spoke at the Left Forum this past weekend, talked about the nuclear threat and how we've basically skipped a bullet with these weapons.
Well, they're still there.
And they're still there. And the fact is, we could have Dr. Strangelove scenarios where we could have some rogue military guy go. So we have got to completely outlaw nuclear weapons, or at least bring them down to such a minimum that no such damage could be done. I mean,
that's an existential threat.
It's a horrible threat. We need to get beyond that. We need to get beyond warfare.
No,
look at all the weapons. Look at all the money we're putting into weapons.
Yeah, right.
We could be curing diseases. We have enough resources to feed everybody.
Yeah.
Nobody should be hungry in this country, in this world. You know, young kids are dying of starvation.
Those are two things that you're proposing, which are new. Is new in my way of thinking, if I may. Real quick, is that the whole world is always, the civilized world has always had a few people who run everything. Rome and the kings in England and the 1,000 years of that, and it's still, now it's run by a group and everything, always like that. And what it's called in terms of the people in political science is called being realistic, being realpolitik.
Right.
And that means power and legitimacy of political authority comes out of who's ever got the club. Whoever's got the weapon advantage.
Right.
Medici's liked Da Vinci because he invented a siege machine that gave them a thing to conquer. You know, it still holds.
Yes.
It's still the principle by which realpolitik is based.
Right.
And that's based, and those weapon systems have, since about 1970, become, in their existence, not inflection points of ideas or theories, but real things, species lethal. Species lethal. That is, even in '62 we were protected if they had even had an unleashing of destroying civilization. Or even Ramsey Clark will talk about the Trident submarine. They've got enough on one submarine. They've got dozens of the submarine. They can destroy every city in Europe from one submarine with atomic and thermonuclear. And the weapons became to where if they were unleashed, apparently,
it's frightening.
But about 1970 is when they crossed the line, where it would mean the end of the Homo sapiens species. Now that's an existential new reality.
Oh my God!
That's an existential, and we were also, according to Fuller and some of the world game things, we were transcending in terms of good design, and like that fellow you had, good design, and doing more with less, and ecological things and everything geodesic. We were transcending. We had haves and have-nots. We were getting to the point where there'd always been more have-nots than haves, and then it got to be where it was growing in the modern experience, and it finally got to be where he said 10% by the First World War, it went hyperbolic, 20% by the Second World War, we were heading for 50% in terms of the capability to provide for everybody as a have. What does it mean to be a have? A definition of term. Get an operating manual for space. We were transcending material scarcity. We had all of our evolution had gone in condition where there's not enough. If you win, I have to lose. All of these kind of argumentations about there. We were transcending that at the level of capability. We had two things, the two-headed sword. And that's why this period, 1970 or so, and we've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, we have to have an operating manual for Spaceship Earth. Based on the new design capability that's emerging evolutionarily. And we're not getting it from our leadership. They're all reified institutions out of history that has been transcended by the demands of the future.
Well, Harold, thank goodness you have the show, and I want to just address...
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. This has got to be said, and you're absolutely right about this. But how, we have got to take steps to fix this with this nuclear threat hanging over all of our heads.
And the potential for liberation at hand that has never been there in all of the human experience.
Herbert Marcuse wrote about this too, Eros and Civilization, about the surpluses that we have and the pleasure that we deny each other. Back in the 70s, there was a movement to basically limit the number of working hours in the week. And
yes,
this is
in Kane City you're going to displace people, the people are being displaced, and the labor theory of value doesn't serve. So if you're a progressive, you're in trouble. A lot of it's been based on the labor theory of value. It's not only information tech, it's robotics. Everything's being made by robotics more and more, and the economic theorizing. It's all out of whack with what the future requires. Isaac Asimov, he said this is the defining generation. 10,000 generations, this is the defining one. It's a little strange to think that may be the case, and we need to have some way of educating people to that and multimedia. And the thing you're doing is really good because you get really good, thoughtful people on your program.
Yeah.
And we do want to get a mention, ethical sales agent.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Okay,
but, you know,
we've only got a few minutes left.
okay,
You know?
I want to say that
I've been ranting too much.
Transforming the business culture inside of corporate America, because people need to learn stuff in there, and people are hurting in there.
Yeah.
People are feeling sad. People are feeling isolated in business. And a lot of people, you know, one of my favorite books is The Bonfire of the Vanities.
Oh, yeah.
And
Is
by-
that
by
what's his name?
Tom Wolfe.
Tom Wolfe. The Man in White.
1987,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
where he talks about the, what was the phrase he used?
I'm not sure. He had another book, The Painted Word.
That's a recent book.
Painted
yes,
Word.
yes.
Yeah, well, that was where he said it's not what the painting is; it's what the critics say the painting is. That was
Right.
really funny and taken for art. Yeah, but
Yeah, the Masters of the Universe.
Okay,
That's what he
another
talked about.
one. Okay,
and
good.
Sherman McCoy
Yeah.
was the guy. He was a wealthy stockbroker, and he was with his family at the beach, enjoying a nice Sunday afternoon. And his little daughter asked him, "Daddy, what do you do?" And he couldn't answer it. He had no idea what to say because he knows he's not doing anything really. He's just like shifting money around. And he had an existential crisis. He started to sweat. And he was like, he couldn't. And then his daughter keeps asking, "Daddy, you know, my friend's father was a publisher, makes books. What do you make, Daddy?" Couldn't figure out what to say. So a lot of people now who studied marketing and they're in corporate America, their lives are empty. In their souls, there's nothing there because they know what they're doing is meaningless. You know, they would love this kind to have a sense of meaning in life, to connect work to making the world a better place.
Okay, well
that's the connection with the ethical sales agent. You know, that you're in the workforce, but you're also in a progressive orientation. My Ethical Business Society, which I created, is for a group of people working in the corporate world, small business people, people in finance, who want to create a better world through politics, and who want to fight back against the right-wing hegemony, which has already infiltrated into the corporate space. And which means that if you're going to do business with somebody, do business with somebody who's ethical, whose politics you agree with. And it's okay to talk about politics in business there. People used to say, "Oh, this is business. Don't mix business with politics." Well, I'm sorry, but it already is mixed. And it's mixed in a right-wing orientation. The left has got to get its money act together.
Good idea.
The left has got to. We need money on the left, okay? Well, George Soros is, you know, doing okay.
He can only handle so much.
But he can only But and many people on the left don't want to talk about money. See? They get allergic to anything to do with money. So that's why I created this Ethical Business Society. I wrote a book, The Ethical Sales Agent.
Yeah, that's just out now, right?
Just published.
Let's see. I'm going to put it up in case.
Oh, sure. Thank
maybe
you,
you
Harold.
can bring it up here. There you go. Okay, yeah. It looks good. It's just out now. Yeah.
It just came out, and I'm on tour, so this is one of my first stops
book
here.
Tour,
book tour, you know, national book tour, international, hopefully. And there's a lot of humanity in this book also. There's a lot of about liberation and transformation. Because as an academic intellectual, coming out of being a teacher for 20 years, and now moving into corporate world, I find that there's a banality there. There's a sense of emptiness and shallowness, you know, and people are hurting.
Fill that void.
I'm channeling in some energy, and I'm trying
You've been doing that for a long time, and one of the tyrannies of the universe is time. We've run out of time.
No,
yes,
Harold,
I'm sorry.
I want to come back.
Thank you.
Though.
We got the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Only beginning.
Thank you for viewing it. It's John Bredin, and he's an ethical sales agent, and he's got a beautiful program that we're very proud to be able to play here on the Manhattan Network. Thank you for that, for all the good work such for a very well-led life. And I thank you for coming in and participating. And we thank you for viewing, and please tune in. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Sorry we run right out of time.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you.